Daniel So died in Singapore. Smoke, coughing, darkness. And he woke up in a yellow steppe under a foreign sky where 7 green orcs were deciding what to do with him. Kill him or use him. There is no third option in such situations. And then the dead man spoke in a language he had never learned. First comes the smell. Wormwood, horse manure, something burnt. The grass pricks his cheek like sandpaper. Daniel opens his eyes and sees the sky. Vast, blue. No clouds, no airplanes, no wires. He sits up. His hands are shaking. His tongue is stuck to the roof of his mouth. To the right lies an overturned cart, and one wheel is still turning lazily. 3 corpses lie nearby. Skinny, tall, with pointed ears. Arrows with black feathers stick out of their backs. This isn't Singapore. This isn't a hospital. This isn't anywhere at all. He shifts his gaze to the left and sees them. 7 of them, each over 6 feet tall. Green skin, not paint. Fangs protrude from their lips. One is clutching an axe the size of a table. Another is rummaging through sacks. A third is staring at Daniel without blinking. And Daniel's brain does what it always does when the world goes mad. It starts counting. 7, armed. 4 horses by the bushes. The one on the left is dragging 3 sacks on a crooked and will be dead in an hour. The one in the center has a sword hilt wrapped in rags, and his hand will slip on the first strike. He lies in the grass among the corpses of pointy-eared and green giants, and the first thing he does is assess their logistics. The largest one approaches, a scar across his entire face, a necklace of teeth around his neck, and the teeth are not human. He leans in, sniffs Daniel like a dog, and growls something hoarse and guttural. No language sounds like that, but Daniel understands, every word. The orc asks why the elves were transporting him, and right then, Daniel realizes 2 things at once. He understands a language he never studied, and these 7 are deciding right now whether he lives or dies. He sits up straight, clears his throat, and says in a foreign language that he can teach them to haul twice as much cargo in the same amount of time with the same horses. And they can start right now with this cart. The scarred orc stares for 10 seconds. Then he growls to the others that the little guy speaks their language. One puts his hand on his axe. The leader introduces himself. Garak, son of Tarbar, Iron Wolf clan, and he promises that if the little guy is lying, his bones will be made into spearheads. Daniel stands up. His legs give way. He is 2 heads shorter than the smallest orc. He asks for a knife. He cuts the harness straps. He reties them. He adjusts the tension so both horses pull equally. Heavy down and toward the axle. Light up and along the edges. He points to a crack in the rim and says the wheel will fall apart in 2 days. The orcs are silent. Garak presses his shoulder against the side and pushes. The cart rolls, noticeably lighter, and Daniel adds more. Your lookout is sitting on the eastern slope and the sun is blinding him. He won't see a rider until he's right up close. Move him to the western slope and he'll spot an enemy 1,000 paces away. 5 seconds of silence. Then Garak laughs, briefly. A barking sound. Surprised, not amused, and he says the little one is riding with them. They toss Daniel onto the horse. The saddle is too small for the orc, and he bounces around in it like a pea in a barrel. The steppe stretches in every direction to the horizon. Not a tree, no roads, no signs. The orcs exchange short phrases, and Daniel catches snippets. The dead elves were slave traders. The caravan was carrying live cargo to the Silver Crown Woods, and he is the live cargo. They were taking him into slavery. The orcs stumbled upon the caravan by accident. They were looking for grain and found him. Daniel shakes in the saddle and tries to piece it all together. He died in Singapore. That much he remembers. Smoke, darkness, and between death and the steppe, a black void. And one detail gnaws at his brain. A second before the darkness, a shadow stood in the doorway of the room. Someone entered while he was gasping for air. He can't recall the face, only the silhouette. But that's not important now. Now he's counting. the water in the flasks, the sun's angle, the caravan's speed. By evening, they're camped by a rocky ridge. They build a fire. They toss Daniel a piece of dried meat as tough as a shoe sole. He chews and listens. The orcs talk about how there isn't enough grain. Winter is near. The herds are thin. A foreign clan has driven sheep onto their pasture, and it will end in bloodshed. The great Khan is dead, and every chieftain is pulling for himself. And Daniel learns all this. A fragmented market, zero coordination, shortages, competition instead of cooperation. A crumbling supply chain looks the same whether in Asia or on a fantasy steppe. Garok sits down beside him. He stares into the fire for a long time. He asks how the boy knows their language. Daniel answers honestly that he doesn't know. He woke up and immediately understood. Garok asks where he's from at all. From a very distant place, Daniel says. There are no elves or magic there, but there are ways to make sure thousands work together and don't go hungry. Orcs aren't people, Garok snorts. It doesn't matter, Daniel replies. The warehouse rules are the same for everyone. And then Garok drops a phrase that makes something click inside Daniel. The clan has a pit in the ground where they store meat and grain, and every winter, half of it rots. Half. Daniel freezes. This isn't just bad. It means that 400 orcs are working twice as hard as they need to survive. He starts asking questions. How many orcs? 400. How many herds? 6 flocks and 2 herds. How many carts? 11. Is there a river? There is one 2 days' journey away. He memorizes every number. There's nothing to write it down on. 400 orcs, 6 flocks, 2 herds, 11 carts, a river. Half of it is rotting. Winter in 2 months. This is a problem he's solved dozens of times in his past life. Only instead of Amazon warehouses, there are pits in the ground. Instead of barcodes, notches on sticks. Instead of trucks, carts with crooked wheels. The essence is the same, always the same. Resources, flows, losses. He lies on his back and looks up at a foreign sky. No Big Dipper, no Orion. Daniel So, 34 years old, master's degree in supply chain optimization. A dead man. And now, who knows who knows where. Tomorrow he'll see the camp. Tomorrow he'll see the pit the orcs call a warehouse. And tomorrow he'll start working. Because that's the only thing he knows how to do. And because if he doesn't make himself useful, he'll be dead again. The Iron Wolf clan's encampment looked like a refugee camp after an earthquake, except the refugees here were 2 meters tall and green. The tents made of animal hides stood in complete disarray. Wherever they'd been pitched, there they stood. There were no paths between them, just trampled paths in the mud. Dogs the size of calves roamed between the tents and rummaged through piles of refuse. The refuse lay right behind the tents. Bones, leftovers, torn hides. No one cleared away the ashes from the fires. They lay in gray piles everywhere. Daniel followed Garo and counted. There were about 70 tents, 5 or 6 orcs in each, judging by their size. That added up to 400. The horses stood tied up at the eastern edge of the camp, skinny. Their ribs were visible. Their feed lay on the ground, right in the dust. About 20% of it was wasted in the dirt and eaten by dogs. Sheep were grazing to the south. He counted 2 shepherds for 6 flocks. That was too few. They were being watched. Every orc they passed turned their head. Daniel felt their stares as physical pressure. He was small, thin, unarmed, without fangs, without green skin. A stranger from head to toe. The orc cubs ran after him, whispering. One threw a pebble at him. It hit his shoulder. Garok growled without turning around, and the orc cubs fell behind. The chieftain's tent stood in the center, 3 times larger than the rest. Spears with animal skulls were stuck into the ground in front of the entrance, signs of authority. Inside, it smelled of smoke and wet wool. Light streamed through a hole in the ceiling. An orc sat on skins by the hearth, old, massive, with gray braids down to his waist. His left arm hung limply, an old wound. His eyes were small and very watchful. It was Tarbar, chieftain of the Iron Wolf clan, Garok's father. Garok gave a brief account. A caravan of elves, arrows, dead slave traders, a small stranger who speaks their language and knows things. Tarbar stared at Daniel without blinking. For a minute. 2. Then he asked one thing. How the little one was useful. Not who he was, not where he was from. How he was useful. Daniel answered. He said he could ensure that the clan wouldn't lose a single sack of grain this winter. Tarbar snorted. He said that every autumn the shamans consecrate the grain, and the spirits decide what will rot and what won't. Daniel said that, with all due respect to the spirits, he would like to see the place where the grain is stored. Tarbar was silent. Then he nodded. Garok led him there. The storage pit was just that, a pit, 3 meters deep, 5 meters wide. The walls were just earth, no lining, no drainage. Skins were stretched over the top. Rain ran down the edges, straight inside. Daniel climbed down. The stench hit his nose so hard he nearly doubled over. Rot, mold, mouse droppings. Sacks lay in a mountain. The ones at the bottom were crushed by those on top. The grain at the bottom had turned into a clumped mass. On one side of the pit, the wall was damp. The water table was close. Everything lying against that wall could be thrown out. He climbed back up. Garok was waiting. Daniel said that half the grain was already dead. Garok clenched his jaw. You could see it in the bulges of muscle on his cheekbones. Daniel said that of the remaining half, even fewer would survive until spring if nothing was changed. But if they did what he said, they could save 80% of what was left. Garok asked what was needed. Daniel began to list the items. We need to pull out all the grain, every last sack. Sort it, the good stuff separately, the questionable stuff separately, the rotten stuff set aside. We need to line the walls of the pit with stone, flat stone, from the river. Stone doesn't let moisture through like soil does. We need to dig a trench around the outside of the pit so rainwater runs away from the edges. We need to build wooden platforms inside. Don't put the sacks on the ground. Leave gaps between the sacks for air. You need to build a roof, not a skin, sloped so the water runs off. And you need to check the pit every 3 days, not once a month, every 3 days. Garok listened. Then he said it was a lot of work. Daniel agreed. He said it was 3 days' work for 20 orcs, or 1 winter of starvation for 400. Garok went to his father. Daniel stood by the pit and waited. He waited a long time. An hour. The sun had shifted noticeably. He sat on a rock and surveyed the camp. He counted. The ratio of men to women, the number of children, the smithy shed on the northern edge. 1 blacksmith. 1. For 400 orcs. He does everything. Horseshoes, spearheads, cauldrons, knives, repairs, all by 1 orc. Daniel had seen the blacksmith at work, slowly. Not because he was lazy, because he switches between tasks every 10 minutes. Just got into the swing of making spearheads. Someone comes in with a cauldron, drops the spearheads, picks up the cauldron, fixes it, goes back to the spearheads, forgot the temperature, heats it up again, wasting time with every switch. Classic. Daniel saw this in the factories in Jakarta, in the warehouses in Manila. It's the same everywhere. Switching between tasks kills productivity. The solution is simple. A schedule. Monday, terminals. Tuesday, boilers. Wednesday, repairs. But that's for later. Right now, it's grain. Garok is back. An orc woman came with him. Tall, red-haired, dark burgundy mane, chainmail, hand-forged. You could tell by the non-standard links. She looked at Daniel the way you look at a cockroach, deciding whether to squash it or not. Garok said this was Gala, his sister, the clan's second warrior. She would keep an eye on the little one. Gala said that if the little one wasted their time, she would personally throw him out of the camp. Daniel nodded. He said that if she didn't see a difference in 3 days, she could throw him out. Gala snorted, but she didn't leave. Tarbhar gave the go-ahead. 20 orcs, 3 days. Daniel started at dawn the next morning, and immediately ran into his first roadblock. The orcs didn't know how to work together. Not because they didn't want to, because they didn't know how. Everyone did whatever they thought was best. 5 orcs were dragging a single sack. 3 stood watching. 2 were arguing about where to place the stones. 1 walked away because he decided his turn was over. Daniel watched this for 15 minutes. Then he called everyone over. He divided them into 4 groups of 5. The first group fetches the sacks. The second sorts them. The third carries stones from the river. The fourth group placed the stones in the pit. Each group did only its own task. They didn't help the others. They didn't switch tasks. The orcs exchanged glances. This was unusual. One asked why he had to carry stones when he was stronger and could have fetched the sacks. Daniel explained. He said that when everyone does one thing, they do it faster because they don't waste time switching tasks. He said that in an hour, they would see for themselves. An hour later, they saw. The sacks were pouring out of the pit in a steady stream. The stones were coming from the river in an even line. The sorting was working without a hitch. Gala stood to the side and watched, silently. By lunchtime, the pit was empty. The grain lay in 3 piles. Good, questionable, dead. The dead was more than a third. The orcs looked at the rotten pile in silence. This was food that wouldn't be there in winter. These were lives that could be lost. Daniel didn't dwell on the emotions. He said they would save what was left. He showed them how to check the grain by touch. Dry means alive. Damp means soon to be dead. Smells sour means already dead. He taught 3 orcs from the sorting group. They learned quickly. On the second day, they began lining the pit with stones. The work went slowly because the stones from the river were different sizes. Daniel walked along the wall under construction and demonstrated. Flat ones on the bottom, medium ones in the middle, small ones to fill the gaps. Gala came over in the evening of the second day. She asked why there were gaps between the sacks. Daniel explained. The grain breathes. If there's no air, it sweats. If it sweats, it rots. The air between the sacks is life for the grain. Gala was silent. Then she said that no one had ever explained why grain rots. Everyone said the spirits take it away. Daniel didn't comment on the subject of spirits. He said that the spirits might take it away, but moisture takes it away faster. Gala didn't smile. But the threat to throw him out of the camp wasn't repeated. On the third day, the pit was ready, stone on the walls, a groove on the outside, wooden planks on the inside. The sacks were stacked with gaps between them. The roof was made of slanted poles and hides. Daniel marked the sacks, notches with a knife. 1 notch meant wheat, 2 notches meant rye, 3 meant barley. Every sack was labeled, the clan's first marking system. Tarbhar came to look. He climbed down into the pit, ran his hand along the stone wall, felt a dry sack, climbed back up, looked at Daniel, said nothing, just nodded. Once, briefly. Garrock explained later, a nod from the father is more than praise. It is acceptance. Daniel is no longer a guest. He is a clan worker. That means they feed him, give him a place in the tent, and don't kill him. It was a good day. Daniel arrived at Iron Wolf's camp and saw the scale of the problems. The grain storage was a pit with no protection from moisture or pests. He organized 20 orcs into work groups, and in 3 days rebuilt the granary, adding stone cladding, drainage, wooden flooring, and a bag labeling system. Chief Tarbhar accepted him as a clan worker, which guaranteed food, shelter, and safety. On the 4th day after the granary was rebuilt, it rained. Not light rain, a real step downpour. A wall of water from the sky. The tents were soaked through. The dogs howled. The horses huddled together. The orcs sat in the tents and waited. Daniel stood by the storage facility under the torrents of water and watched. The gutter worked. Water ran down the sloped roof and drained into the gutter. The gutter carried the water away from the pit down the slope. Not a single drop got inside. He stood there, soaking wet, and smiled like an idiot. It was his first smile in 4 days in this world. Gala found him there. She asked why he was standing in the rain. He said he was checking. She looked at the storage area. She looked at the dry walls inside. She looked at the water flowing away through the gutter. She didn't say a word. She left. But that evening, she brought him a dry hide to sleep on. She just tossed it at the entrance to his corner of the tent. She didn't say a word. On the 5th day, Daniel met Zane, or rather, Zane met him. He was sitting by the storeroom, drawing lines in the dirt with a stick. He was counting the supplies, trying to figure out how much grain 400 orcs would need for the winter. The ground was damp from the rain. Good for writing, bad for storage. Someone stopped nearby. A shadow fell across his drawings. He looked up. An orc woman, but not quite. Shorter than the other orcs, thinner. Her skin was greenish but lighter. Her face was narrower. Her eyes weren't yellow like the others, but brown with golden flecks. A half-breed. She wore a shaman's robe with bone beads on the seams, but beneath the robe, Daniel noticed a belt. Not a combat belt, a utility belt, with loops for tools. She wasn't looking at him. She was looking at his drawings on the ground, and her eyes were the kind Daniel had seen in interns when they were first shown how the warehouse program worked. Hunger. Pure intellectual hunger. She said her name was Zane Tar Morven. She said she was the clan's shaman. She sees spirits and interprets signs. Then she paused and asked what his symbols on the ground meant. Daniel explained. This is the number of sacks. This is the number of mouths. This is the number of days until spring. If you divide the first by the second and multiply by the third, you get how much grain to distribute per day. Zane crouched down. She looked at the numbers. She ran her finger along the lines. Then she asked if everything could be counted that way. Not just grain, meat, hides, firewood, arrows. Daniel said it was possible, that you could count just about anything that could be counted this way. Zane looked up at him. There was something in her eyes that Daniel recognized immediately. He saw it in the mirror every morning in Seattle. A man who had known his whole life that he was smart and had never been able to find a use for that intelligence. He told her one thing. He asked if she knew how to write. Zane shook her head. Orcs don't write. They have no written language. Knowledge is passed down orally from shaman to shaman. Each generation learns it anew. Each generation loses a piece. Daniel nodded. He said he would teach her. Zane blinked. She asked him to repeat it. He repeated himself. He said he needed someone to keep track of the grain, someone with a good head on their shoulders, someone he could trust with the records. And he said that starting today, that was her job. Zane was silent for a long time. Then she stood up. She straightened up and said she needed paper and ink. Daniel almost laughed, because it was the perfect answer. No, thank you. I don't need that. No, I can't do it. What do I need to do the job? There was no paper. There was no ink. Nothing of the sort existed in the camp. Daniel thought about it for 2 days. Then he went to the blacksmith. The blacksmith's name was Urgot. Huge, even by orc standards, hands like shovels. He was silent. Daniel asked him to make 3 things. A thin metal plate the size of a palm, a sharp rod like an awl, and a flat wooden board. Urgot asked why. Daniel explained. The plate is the surface, the rod is the pen, the board is the desk. He'll cover the plate with a thin layer of wax. He could scratch the wax with the rod. The marks on the wax were records. When the plate was full, the wax could be smoothed out and rewritten. Urgot looked at him as if he were mad, but he did it in a day. The quality was rough but functional. Daniel took the tablet to Zane. He showed her how to hold the stylus, how to draw lines, how to make symbols for numbers. 1, 2, 3, 10, 100. A simple decimal system, sticks and dots. Zane caught on instantly. By evening, she had learned the numbers up to 100. By the second evening, she had learned to add and subtract. By the third, to multiply. Daniel sat nearby by the oil lamp and watched as she scratched the numbers into the wax, quickly, accurately, without mistakes. A week later, Zane conducted her first inventory of the storehouse, all by herself. She counted every sack, wrote it down on a tablet. She went to Daniel and told him they had 172 sacks of wheat, 91 sacks of rye, 44 sacks of barley, a total of 307 sacks. If they distributed it according to the rations he had calculated, it would last until spring with a 12-day reserve. Daniel checked. Everything matched. He looked at her and said that she had just done what in his world is called an inventory, and that people spend months learning how to do it. Zane shrugged. She said that they were just numbers, and that numbers don't lie. That was what Daniel liked best. At the same time, he was working with Garak. He was explaining the concept of a schedule to him, not in general terms, using the specific example of the blacksmith Orgot. He led Garak to the smithy shed. He demonstrated. Here, Orgot is making a spearhead. Grot came in with a cauldron. Orgot dropped the spearhead. He picked up the cauldron. He fixed it. He went back to the spearhead. He forgot where he left off. He reheats it. Wasted an extra 20 minutes. 10 such switches a day. 200 wasted minutes. More than 3 hours wasted. Garak watched. He counted in his head. He wasn't stupid. Daniel saw that from day one. Garak was a natural leader. It was just that no one had given him the tools. Daniel suggested a simple solution. Mornings for arrowheads, afternoons for repairs, evenings for new orders. Anyone who wants a boiler fixed brings it in the morning and picks it up in the evening. No standing over them, no waiting. Orgot resisted at first. He grumbled that he'd always done things his way, and his father had done the same. Garak told him to try it for 3 days. If he didn't like it, he could go back to the way things were. 3 days later, Orgot had made twice as many tips as he would in a normal week. He went to Daniel himself and said that the little guy wasn't as useless as he looked. For an orc, that was almost a compliment. But not everyone was happy. The old shaman Rug Tahar came to see Tarbar on the 7th day. Daniel wasn't present during the conversation, but Garak told him about it later. Rug Tahar said that the stranger was insulting the ancestors, that an orc is strong because he fights, that counting sacks was a task for elven weaklings, that the stranger was distracting the young ones from their training, that his methods were foreign magic disguised as simplicity. Tarbar listened in silence. Then he asked one thing. Had the grain rotted after the rain? Rug Tahar remained silent. Tarbar said the stranger would stay, for now. That, for now, sounded like a knife to the throat. Daniel understood. A single rain proved nothing. A single successful reloading of the cart didn't make him indispensable. He needed more. He needed every orc in the camp to see the difference, not just once, but every day. He began to think of measures. The orcs had no units of measurement. Weight was determined by touch, length by steps, volume by eye. Every orc measured by his own way. One would say a sack was heavy, another would say it was light, the very same sack. Because hands are different, strengths are different, the concept of heavy is different. Daniel needed a standard, something fixed, something that meant the same thing to everyone. He looked at Garak, at his hands, Garak's palm, wide, flat, recognizable. Every orc in the clan knew Garak's hand. It was famous for splitting a stone pillar in two with a single blow at the Great Council 2 years ago. Daniel suggested it. Garak's palm is a unit of length. The weight of Garak's palm in stone is a unit of weight. He asked Urgot to carve a stone block exactly to the size and weight of Garak's palm. This became the standard. Anyone could take their own block, compare it, and say for sure. This sack weighs 30 palms. That one, 25. Not heavy, not light. 30 palms. Garak laughed when he found out. He said that his hand was now more important than his sword. Daniel replied that that was how it should be. Daniel met the half-blood shaman Zane and took her as his apprentice, teaching her numbers and basic accounting on wax tablets. Zane conducted the first inventory of the storeroom. At the same time, Daniel introduced a schedule for the blacksmith Urgot, doubling his productivity. The old shaman Rug, Tahar, began to oppose Daniel, but Tarbar is still on the stranger's side. The first standard measures of weight and length, based on Garak's palm, were introduced. The first month passed. Daniel counted the days with notches on a pole in his corner of the tent. 30 notches. 30 days in a world that shouldn't exist. He had grown accustomed to the smell, to the tough grass, to the fact that the water here smelled of iron, to the fact that every morning began with the blare of a horn, and that 6-foot-tall green warriors walked through the camp with axes at the ready as casually as people in Seattle walk around with coffee. He hadn't gotten used to the loneliness. Among 400 orcs, he was alone, the only non-orc, the only one who looked different, spoke differently, thought differently. At night he lay on the skins and listened to the snoring of Garrock and his warriors, and stared into the darkness and thought of Seattle, of the apartment on the 12th floor, of Blue Bottle coffee, of Excel spreadsheets, of the bore that no longer existed. Then he'd switch gears, because longing doesn't solve problems, and there were plenty of problems. Problem number 1, food. He'd repaired the storage area, but there wasn't much grain. 307 sacks would barely be enough. If winter dragged on, the clan would start to starve. They needed meat. But the orcs stored meat even worse than grain. They dried it in the wind. Some was eaten by flies. Some went bad from moisture. Some just got lost. Daniel suggested a smokehouse. The orcs knew about smoke. Every tent was full of smoke. But no one had thought of an enclosed space where the smoke passes through the meat evenly and dries it in days rather than weeks. He drew a simple diagram on Zane's wax tablet. A pit for a fire, a smoke channel, an enclosed chamber on top, shelves for the meat, a chimney on top. Zane redrew it. She showed it to Garrock. Garrock showed it to Urgot. Urgot grumbled that it could be built. They built it for a week, stone and clay. They loaded the first batch of meat on the night of the full moon. 3 days later, they took it out. The meat was dry, dark, firm. It didn't stink. It didn't crumble. One piece of this meat gave as much strength as 3 pieces of raw meat, and it kept for months. The orcs chewed the first pieces in silence. Then they chewed some more. Then Garrock said they needed to build a second smokehouse. Daniel said they needed 3. Garrock snorted. He agreed. Problem number 2, people. Not in the sense of race, in the sense of organization. 400 orcs lived as 400 separate units. Each family was its own master. They hunted for themselves. They stored for themselves. They spent for themselves. No common plan. No distribution. If one family had a good harvest and the neighbor's was poor, the neighbor would go hungry. Help was possible, but only through personal connections, friendship or kinship. There was no system. Daniel couldn't introduce centralized distribution. Not now. It was too early. The orcs didn't trust a stranger that much, and rightly so. But he could have introduced record-keeping. Zane walked through the camp with a wax tablet and took notes. How many sacks each family had. How many head of livestock. How many mouths to feed. The orcs reacted differently. Some let her in and showed her willingly. Others slammed the tent flap shut right in her face. One old orc woman spat at her feet and called her a half-breed spy. Zane returned in the evening. The tablet was 2/3 full. 1/3 of the families had refused. She didn't complain. She simply placed the tablet in front of Daniel and stated the numbers. He listened and saw the picture. The disparity was staggering. Some families had enough supplies to last 3 winters. Others wouldn't make it through a month. And those who had plenty weren't going to share, not out of greed, out of fear. Because past winters had taught them that today's stockpile is tomorrow's life, and that no one would come to help. Daniel didn't say anything to Tarbar. He didn't demand redistribution. Instead, he did something else. He asked Zane to draw up a chart, the first chart in the history of the orcs. Families on the left, categories at the top, grain, meat, hides, livestock, tools. Numbers in the cells. Zane worked on it for 2 days. Then Daniel hung the table on a pole in the center of the camp, out in the open, for everyone to see. The result was immediate. The orcs who had refused Zane saw that their neighbors had accepted her, and that next to the names of those who had accepted her were numbers, and next to the names of those who hadn't let her in were empty cells. An empty cell on the chart turned out to be scarier than a number, because a number is a fact, and emptiness is suspicion, that you're hiding something. Why didn't you show it? Maybe you have nothing and you're weak. Or maybe you have too much and you're greedy. 3 days later, 8 more families let Zane in. A week later, only 5 of the most stubborn refused. Daniel didn't pressure them. He just waited. The empty cells applied the pressure themselves. Problem number 3. Gala. She wasn't a problem in the usual sense. She was a problem because Daniel couldn't ignore her. She followed him, not as a guard, as an observer. She stood on the sidelines. She watched. She listened. Sometimes she asked questions. Sharp ones. Precise ones. Why was the meat on shelves instead of on hooks? Why are the gaps exactly this wide? Why is the chart on the pole and not with Tadbar? Daniel answered every question, patiently, in detail, because behind every question Gala asked was a mind that craved a challenge. She was a warrior. All her life she had been taught to fight, to run, to carry, to survive. No one had ever once asked what she thought about anything other than fighting. One evening, she approached him by the campfire. He was drawing a layout of the tents on the ground. He'd been thinking for a week that the chaotic arrangement was causing problems. No paths for the carts. No access to water from the center. No separate area for livestock for living quarters. Gala sat down next to him. She looked at the diagram. Then she said her shoulder ached, her right one, every morning, since last winter. Daniel didn't understand what her shoulder had to do with it. She explained. Her hammer. The war hammer she's carried since she was 16. Heavy. The balance is shifted toward the head. Every blow puts uneven strain on her right shoulder. 10 years of such blows, and her shoulder has started to pay the price. She said it calmly, like a fact. But Daniel heard what she didn't say. In 10 years, she won't be able to hold the hammer. And if she can't hold the hammer, she'll stop being a warrior. And if she stops being a warrior, who is she? He said he'd think about it. For 3 nights he drew, on a wax tablet. He erased. He drew again. He wasn't an engineer, but he understood balance, center of gravity, load distribution. The same principles as in a cart. Heavy toward the center, counterweight. If you add a weight to the handle below the grip, the head of the hammer will become lighter relative to the hand. The blow would be just as strong because the mass is the same, but the shoulder would be loaded evenly. He took the drawing to Urgat. Urgat looked at it for a long time. He turned the plate over in his hands. Then he said that no one had ever made a hammer like that. Daniel said that wasn't a reason not to make it. Urgat snorted, but he got to work. 4 days later, the hammer was ready. Rough, heavy, but with a counterweight on the handle. Gala took it. She turned it over in her hands. She swung it. She struck the training post. The post cracked just as it had with the old hammer, but Gala stood steadier. Her shoulder didn't flinch. She struck again, and again, 10 strikes in a row. She set the hammer down. She touched her right shoulder. She wiggled her arm. She turned to Daniel, silently, for a long time. Then she said one word. Good. And she left. From then on, she stopped following him as an observer. Now she walked beside him, as an ally. Winter was approaching. The nights grew longer. The wind grew fiercer. The grass turned yellow, then white. The first frost settled on the tents one morning at the end of the month. Daniel stood by the storeroom, looking out at the white steppe, and thought that in a month the real cold would set in, and that 307 sacks was barely enough, and that there was more meat from the smokehouses now, but not enough, and that 5 families still hadn't let Zane in with the tally, and that Rug Tahar was walking around gloomy and whispering with the old warriors, and that somewhere to the west stood a kingdom that wanted to destroy them all, and that he was alone, completely alone. A logistics manager in a world without logistics. Then Zane approached and stood beside him, with a tablet in her hands, with numbers, with a question in her eyes. And he thought that maybe he wasn't quite alone, and he went back to work. Daniel built a smokehouse for meat and began taking inventory of the family's supplies through Zane, creating the first inventory table in the clan's history. The table on a pole in the center of the camp became a tool of social pressure, and most families opened up their supplies. Daniel designed a new counterweighted hammer for Gala, and transformed her from an observer into an ally. Winter is approaching, and resources are running low. Winter struck overnight. It was cold in the evening. By morning, it had become unbearable. Daniel woke up because he couldn't feel his fingers. The hides were frosted on the inside. His breath came out in steam. He crawled out of the tent and saw a step he didn't recognize. White, flat, dead. A thin layer of snow had fallen but the wind carried it horizontally and cut his face like glass. 20 below, maybe lower. Daniel wasn't made for this. His body, his former body from Seattle, froze at 10 above. Here, he was in that same body, skinny, thin, without the subcutaneous fat that orcs used as armor. He stood in the wind, shivering so hard his teeth chattered. Gala came out behind him. She looked at him. Without a word, she took off her outer pelt and draped it over his shoulders. The pelt was warm from her body and as big as a tent. Daniel was swallowed up by it. Gala said that if the little one froze to death, the hammer would have been wasted, and she left. It was concern, in the Orcish language. The first week of winter revealed everything. The storehouse held up. The grain was dry. The markings on the sacks worked. Zane handed out the daily rations according to her records. Each family received exactly as much as they were entitled to, based on the number of mouths to feed. No more, no less. The smokehouses were working. There was meat. The orcs ate in silence and didn't complain. But Daniel saw what others didn't, the rate of consumption. The grain was running out faster than he'd planned, by 12%. He spent 2 days looking for the reason. He found it. The dogs. The camp dogs, whom no one counted as mouths to feed, were stealing from the sacks while they were being carried. Not much, just a handful. But a handful per dog per day adds up to a sack a week for the whole pack, and the pack consists of 40 dogs. He went to Gurok and said the dogs needed to be fed separately. Garok looked at him strangely. The orcs didn't feed the dogs on purpose. The dogs lived off whatever they could find. It had always been that way. Daniel explained, if the dogs were fed separately and in one place, they would stop stealing from the sacks. The overall grain loss would decrease. The cost of feeding the dogs would be less than the cost of what they steal. It's basic economics. Garok thought for a minute. Then he said, okay. A week later, the overspending had dropped to 2%. Zane recorded it on a tablet. Daniel looked at that number and felt a satisfaction he couldn't explain to anyone in this world. 2%. In Seattle, a result like that would have earned a quarterly bonus. The second week brought the first crisis, the Redstone clan. Their camp stood halfway south. 3 horsemen arrived at dawn, hungry. Their faces were chapped from the cold. Their leader entered Tarbar's tent and asked for food. Half of the Redstone's herd had died. The grain had rotted. They were starving. Daniel was present during the conversation. He stood by the wall. He listened. Tarbar was silent. Rugtahar stood next to the chieftain and was silent too. Orochi custom said one thing. If a clan is starving, it's their problem. Every man for himself. You can help, if you want to, but no one is obligated. Daniel thought quickly. Giving away the grain means weakening his clan. Not giving it away means watching his neighbors die. But there was a third option. He approached Tarbar, quietly. He said 3 words. Don't give it away. Sell it. Tarbar turned his head. Daniel explained, not in a whisper, loudly, in front of everyone. The Iron Wolf clan will give Redstone grain, enough to survive the winter, but not for free. In exchange, Redstone will send 20 young orcs for 2 months. They will work, build, haul stone, do whatever, Daniel. When spring comes, they'll return home, well-fed, trained, with skills their clan lacks. The Redstone envoy looked at Daniel as if he'd offered him a rock to eat. Orcs don't work for food. Orcs fight for food, or they beg for food, or they steal food. But they don't work for it. That's beneath their dignity. Daniel waited. Tarbar was silent. Rugtahar opened his mouth to object, but Garok beat him to it. He stood up and said the terms were fair, that grain was worth the work, that if Redstone wanted pride instead of food, then let pride feed their children in the winter. The messenger clenched his jaw for a long time. Then he nodded. He left. 4 days later, 20 young orcs from Redstone arrived at Iron Wolf's camp, angry, humiliated, hungry. Daniel met them personally, showed them where to sleep, showed them where to eat, fed them. Then he said that tomorrow they would begin building a second granary, bigger than the first, and a third smokehouse, and a livestock pen with a snow shelter. They worked. At first, sullenly. Then they got used to it. Daniel divided them up just like his own men, groups of 5. Each group had one task. A week later, the young orcs of Redstone were building faster than the Iron Wolf orcs had on their first try. Because now Daniel had experience. He knew what mistakes they would make and warned them in advance. One of them was named Ragtun, young, 19 years old, quiet for an orc. Not the strongest, but the most careful. His stones fit together more evenly than anyone else's. The walls he laid didn't need any adjustments. Daniel noticed. He walked over. He asked if he'd done this before. Ragtun said no. He just sees where the stone wants to go. Daniel nodded. He thought for a moment. Then he went to Urgot and asked him to show Ragtun the blacksmith's trade. Urgot looked skeptical, but he agreed. 2 weeks later, Ragtun was making simple fasteners and staples just as well as Urgot himself. Urgot said the boy had hands. Good hands. Daniel thought he had just found a second blacksmith. Not through inheritance, not through tradition, through observation and a test. It was a small event, but it was important, because in the Orcish world, a blacksmith's son became a blacksmith. A warrior's son became a warrior. A shaman's apprentice became a shaman. Daniel had just broken that pattern. He had appointed someone based on ability, not birth. Ragtahar noticed. He came to the pit where the new storage facility was being built. He stood and watched the Redstone orcs working alongside the Iron Wolf orcs. At Ragtun, who was hammering away in the smithy shed. At Zaina, who was walking between rows of sacks with a plate in her hands. He turned to Daniel. He said quietly, "You changing us." He didn't say if it was good or bad. He simply stated it. Daniel replied that he wasn't changing us. He was showing that things could be done differently. Ragtahar shook his head and walked away. By the end of the second month of winter, the camp had changed. It was unrecognizable. 2 storage facilities, 3 smokehouses, a livestock pen, a workshop by the smithy shed. The paths between the tents were cleared and packed down. Waste was taken to a single spot outside the camp. The dogs were fed in a designated area. Zane kept a daily record of consumption and remaining supplies. Every family knew their daily ration. No one is starving. Not a single orc. Not one. For the first time in 3 winters in a row. One night, Daniel sat by the lamp and counted. Not supplies, not rations. He was counting something else. Time. Spring in 6 weeks. When spring comes, the Redstone orcs will go home. They'll take their skills with them. They'll tell their clan. And then the other clans will find out. And some will come begging. And others will come to take. And somewhere beyond the steppe, beyond the horizon, Valdemar is sharpening his swords. 40,000 soldiers, heavy cavalry, siege engines. Daniel saw these numbers in his mind as clearly as he saw the sacks in the storeroom. 400 orcs of the Iron Wolf clan won't stop the army. Not even 1,000 will stop it. Not even all 12 clans together if they fight as they always do. Every man for himself, each chieftain a separate unit. Something else is needed. A system is needed. Not a single warehouse, a network of warehouses. Not a single clan, all the clans. Not a single route, a network of routes. Not war, trade. Make it so that fighting the orcs is more expensive than trading with them. He leaned back on the furs and closed his eyes. A map stood before his inner gaze. The steppe, the 12 clans, mountains to the north, halfling fields to the south, human kingdoms to the west, elven forests to the east. Roads, caravans, flows of goods. He saw all this as clearly as he had seen the delivery map on the monitor in the Amazon office. Only the scale was different. Back then, he had optimized the delivery of packages within 2 days. Now he had to optimize the survival of an entire people. The scale was greater. The principles were the same: resources, flows, losses, optimization. He fell asleep with that thought, and for the first time in 2 months in this world, he didn't dream of Seattle. The first winter proved that Daniel's system worked. The Iron Wolf clan didn't lose a single orc to starvation. The Redstone orcs who had come for help received grain in exchange for labor, and 20 of their young warriors built a second granary and a third smokehouse. Daniel discovered Ragdon's talent as a stonemason and apprenticed him to a blacksmith, breaking with the traditional system of craft inheritance. He began to think strategically about the need to unite all 12 clans into a single system to resist Valdemar's invasion. Spring arrived wet and bitter. The snow did not melt, but turned to mud. The steppe became a swamp for 2 weeks. The carts sank up to their axles, the horses slipped. But Daniel had expected this. He knew that spring was a window, a brief one, between winter survival and summer heat. A window in which one must manage to do everything that could not be done in winter. 20 Redstone orcs were heading home. Daniel went out to see them off. They stood at the edge of the camp, well-fed, clothed, different. 2 months ago they had arrived angry and humiliated. Now they were leaving silently and solemnly. Ragton approached last. He looked up at Daniel, then down at him because he was a head and a half taller. He said he wanted to stay. Daniel shook his head. He said Ragton was needed by his clan, that he now knew how to do things no one else in Redstone could, that he had to go back and teach the others. Ragton clenched his jaw. Then he nodded. He left. Daniel watched them go and thought, 20 orcs, 20 bearers of knowledge, 20 seeds. In a month, Redstone would begin building its storage facilities according to his plans. In 2 months, it would start smoking meat. In 3, the word would spread across the steppe. This was a plan, not charity, an investment. Every clan that builds a storage facility based on his model becomes a node in the network. Every node is an exchange point. Every exchange point is a thread that Daniel can pull when the time comes. But first, he needs a route, a real trade route, not a trail that someone passes by. A route, with a schedule, with staging points, with cargo turnover. He unfolded the plan before Garak on a large leather hide that Zane had ruled out as a map. Iron Wolf's encampment in the center. To the south, the Halfling lands, a 3-day journey. The Halflings grow grain and vegetables, lots of grain, more than they eat. They have a surplus. The Orcs have a shortage. The Orcs have wool, sheep's wool, lots of it. Bales lie idle in the tents because the Orcs don't weave fine cloth. The half-goblins weave. They need wool. The exchange is beneficial to both sides. There's just one problem. The half-elves are afraid of the Orcs. 100 years of raids, 100 years of plundering. To a halfling, an orc is a green nightmare that comes at night and takes everything. Garak listened and said that the halflings were right to be afraid, that orcs had indeed plundered them for generations, and that he didn't see how a little guy was going to change that. Daniel said one word: contract. Garak didn't understand. Daniel explained. Paper, with obligations from both sides. The Iron Wolf clan agrees to deliver 100 bales of wool by a certain date. The half-elves agree to deliver 200 sacks of grain by another date. If one side fails to fulfill its obligation, it pays a penalty. The penalty is agreed upon in advance. Everything is written down. Everything is signed. Garak asked why they needed a paper when they could just agree verbally. Daniel replied that words are forgotten, that in a month, one side will say, "We agreed on 100, and the other will say 50. Paper doesn't forget. Paper is the same for everyone. Paper is a memory that cannot be altered retroactively. Garak was silent. Then he said that for this to happen, the half-elves would have to agree to sit down at the same table with the orcs. Daniel nodded, and said that for this, he needed Gala. Garak raised an eyebrow. Daniel explained. The half-goblins fear orc warriors. A big green giant with an axe is the embodiment of all their nightmares. But Gala is different. She's a warrior, but she's a woman. The half-giants are matriarchal. Their women run the household and make the decisions. If they see an orc woman warrior who has come to talk rather than plunder, it will throw them off balance. It will break the mold. It will give them a moment of confusion, and a second of confusion is all a negotiator needs. Gala listened to him with a stony face. Then she asked if she should smile. Daniel said absolutely not. An orcish smile means fangs showing. The half-elves won't appreciate it. Just be yourself. Speak calmly. Stand up straight. Don't touch the hammer. Gala snorted. They set out 3 days later. Daniel, Gala, Zane. 4 warriors for protection, 2 wagons of wool. Repacked according to Daniel's system. 3 days' journey south. Daniel was shaking in the saddle and cursing everything under the sun. His back ached. His legs throbbed. His butt was on fire. He wasn't a rider. Never had been. He didn't even ride a bike in Seattle. And here was a steppe horse that didn't know the meaning of the word smooth. Zane rode alongside him, confidently, a clipboard strapped to her belt, a rod behind her ear. She was recording everything. Distance, time, landmarks. The Orcs' first roadmap. Daniel had asked her to mark places where there was water, where there was shelter from the wind, where the ground was firm enough for wagons. Every such place was a potential staging point. On the second day, they saw the border. Not a wall, not a fence, just a change in the landscape. The yellow steppe grass gave way to green. Trees appeared, fences, garden beds, small houses with round doors. Halfling land. The first halfling spotted them from the field, a small figure amid the greenery. He froze. Then he ran, fast, toward the village. An hour later, a crowd had gathered near the village. 50 halflings, armed with pitchforks and hoes, women in front, men behind, children hidden. Daniel dismounted. One approached, unarmed. No Gala, no guards. Small, even by human standards. Among the half-elves, he looked almost normal, slightly taller than them. He spoke in the common tongue, not Orcish. He introduced himself, said he had come with goods, wool. He pointed to the carts. He said he wanted to trade it for grain, not to rob, not to beg, to trade, on terms that would suit both sides. The eldest halfling stepped forward, gray-haired, small, hard as a rock. She looked past Daniel at the Orcs, at Gala, at the guards' axes. She asked why the Orcs needed a contract if they could just take it. Daniel said they could take it once, but they could trade every season, and that every season was more than once. The elder thought for a long time. Then she said, "Let the green woman come forward." Gala stepped forward. She stood before the halfling like a tower before a stone. The elder looked up. She asked if the green woman had come to take it. Gala said no. She had come to trade. The elder asked what would happen if the halflings refused. Gala said that then they would leave, with the wool, and go to another village. The elder looked her in the eyes, for a minute. Then she nodded. She said to let them show the wool. Gala personally untied the bales. The wool was good, thick, clean. Before leaving, Daniel had made them comb and sort through every bale, remove the dirt, remove the burrs, sort by color and length. The half-goblins felt the wool and exchanged glances. They'd never seen such clean wool from the Orcs. It always came in dirty clumps, if it came at all, that is, and wasn't taken away. The elder named her price, 100 bales of wool for 100 sacks of grain. Daniel shook his head. He said 200 sacks. He explained. The wool is sorted, combed, ready for spinning. The half-elves will save a week's worth of processing work. A week's work costs money. 100 sacks is the price for dirty wool, 200 for clean. The elder argued for half an hour. Zane recorded every offer and counteroffer on a tablet. Gala stood silent as a statue. In the end, they settled on 160. Daniel nodded. He asked for paper. The half-elves watched as he wrote the contract. On parchment that the elder had produced from her own supplies. 12 lines. The parties, the goods, the quantity, terms, penalty for non-performance. 2 signatures. Gala's mark, because orcs don't write. The elders flourish. Zane made a copy on a tablet. The first trade contract in orc history. The return journey took the same 3 days, but the mood was different. Gala was silent the entire first day. On the second evening, by the fire, she asked Daniel why he had bargained for 200 but agreed to 160, why he hadn't insisted. Daniel explained, "The first contract isn't about profit. The first contract is about trust. If he pushes for the maximum price, the half-elves will fulfill it once and never again. If he gives in a little, they'll remember that orcs know how to compromise, and they'll come back, and they'll tell their neighbors. 160 sacks now is 1,000 sacks a year from now." Gala thought about it. Then she said it was like a war, only a slow one. Daniel said that was exactly what it was. Only the winner is the one people want to trade with, not the one they run away from. Zane was silent the whole way and wrote a route map, travel time, water consumption, places to camp, 2 water sources along the way, 1 ford, a stretch where the wagons got stuck and they had to go around to the east. By the time they returned to the camp, she had a complete route map ready, the first in the history of the steppe. Daniel looked at it by lamplight that evening. Zane sat beside him, waiting. He said it was excellent work. She shrugged, said she had simply written down what she saw. He shook his head. He said that anyone could see. She was the only one who could record it. That was the difference. Zane was silent. Then she said quietly that before she had been valued only for seeing spirits, for her half-blood gift, not for her mind. Daniel didn't know what to say. He wasn't good at offering comfort. He never had been, not even in Seattle. So he just did what he knew how to do. He went to Urgot the next morning. He described what he needed, a light rod, not made of iron, made of bone, thin, for her left hand. Zane was left-handed. A metal rod was heavy and uncomfortable for her. Then an inkwell, a small one, with a lid that wouldn't open when shaken, so it could be worn on a belt. And a new plate, thinner, lighter, with curved edges so the wax wouldn't chip off. Urgot asked why it had to be so complicated. Daniel said that the tool should fit the worker, not the worker the tool. 3 days later, the set was ready. Daniel handed it to Zane, silently. He set it on the stone next to her while she counted the remaining items in the storeroom. She picked up the stylus, turned it in her left hand, tried drawing a line on the tablet. The line lay straight, effortlessly. She opened the inkwell, closed it, shook it. No ink spilled. She looked at Daniel for a long time. He had already turned away and was walking toward the storeroom. He didn't see her face. And that was for the best, because it was the kind of face that shouldn't be seen. The Redstone Orcs went home, taking their skills with them. Daniel organized the first trade expedition to the half-elves, taking Gala along as the negotiator and Zane as the cartographer. The first contract in Orc history was signed, 100 bales of wool for 160 sacks of grain. Zane drew up the first route map of the steppe. Daniel ordered a personal writing set for her, designed for left-handed use. Summer arrived with a heat that made the horizon melt. The steppe dried up and turned golden. Dust stood in columns. Daniel got so sunburned in the first week that his skin peeled off in sheets. Zane smeared his back with some green goo that stank like a swamp, but helped. He walked around red and scaly, and the orcs now called him not Little One, but Lizard. It was almost affectionate. In the 3 months following the first contract with the half-elves, the world had changed. The caravan traveled south every 20 days. Wool there, grain back. The route was well-trodden, 3 staging points. At each, a water supply and a place to spend the night. Zane kept the caravan schedule. Departure date, return date, cargo, losses en route, time for each segment. The data from the past 3 months already showed a pattern. The third segment of the journey was always slower because of the climb. The grain carts were heavier than the wool carts, That meant an extra horse was needed on this stretch of the return trip. Not for the entire route, just for the third leg. Daniel introduced a replacement horse at transfer point number 2. The return trip was cut by half a day. Zane made a note of it. 6 clans were now in contact with Iron Wolf. Redstone arrived first. Ashhorn followed, then Broken Fang, then Stepbone, then Flint, then Bitterroot. Each came for one reason. Winter had shown who was starving and who was not. Iron Wolf was not starving. Everyone saw it. Everyone wanted the same. Daniel didn't give away secrets for free, and he didn't sell them for food like he did to Redstone. Now he had a different currency. He offered every clan the same thing. Your orcs come for 2 months. They learn to build storage facilities. They learn to keep records. They learn to work on a schedule. In return, each clan contributes 10% of its production to a common fund. The common fund is insurance. If one clan faces a drought or a plague, the other 5 cover the costs. Not out of kindness. It's a matter of calculation. Because today you have a drought, and tomorrow I will. It's called risk insurance. In Seattle, it's an insurance policy. Here, it's a promise of grain. 4 chiefs agreed immediately. 2 haggled. The chief of Broken Fang, an old, stubborn orc named Grokon, demanded that Daniel come to his camp in person and demonstrate. Daniel went. 3 days one way. Grokon met him in silence, showed him around the camp, showed him his grain pit. The pit was worse than Iron Wolf's before the renovation. Deeper, damp, with rats that didn't even try to hide. Daniel asked for 10 orcs and 5 days. Grokon agreed. 5 days later, the pit became a storage facility. Grokon climbed down inside. He touched the stone walls. He sniffed the dry sacks. He climbed back up. He looked at Daniel and said he was entering into the agreement. 10% to the general fund. Daniel nodded. 6 clans. 6 storage pits. 6 of Zane's disciples who kept records, each in their own camp. 6 nodes in a network that didn't exist 6 months ago. But there were those who didn't want to. 6 clans stayed on the sidelines. Among them was the Black Sun clan, the largest after the Iron Wolf. 600 orcs. Chieftain Ashkar Black Sun, young, ambitious, dangerous. He didn't come to ask. He didn't come to negotiate. He came with 20 horsemen to transit point number 2 and took a replacement horse. He just took it, just as the orcs always took things. The strong take, the weak endure. Garrock wanted to respond with a raid, to gather 40 warriors and bring the horse back with blood on it. Daniel said no. He said one horse wasn't worth 40 lives, and that Ashkar was waiting for just that. He wants to provoke us. He wants to show the other clans that the Iron Wolf has grown weak, that trade has softened them, that real orcs take, they don't negotiate. If Garrock responds with a raid, it's war. 2 clans would be slaughtering each other all summer. The rest would watch and choose sides. The agreement would fall apart. Everything built over 6 months would collapse in a week. Garrock listened with a stony face. His blood was boiling. He was a warrior. Every cell in his body screamed to strike back. But he listened. Daniel proposed something else. He proposed making transit point number 2 shared. Not belonging to any clan. Neutral territory. Any clan could use it. Any clan was obligated to replenish the water and fodder supplies. Whoever used it would maintain it. If Ashkar took a horse from the neutral point, he hadn't robbed the Iron Wolf. He had robbed everyone. Let the 6 chiefs of the agreement write a joint letter to Ashkar. Not a threat, an invitation. To join, to use, on equal terms. Or to explain to the other clans why he steals from everyone. Garrock thought about it for 2 days. Then he agreed. Zane wrote the letter, on parchment, in the beautiful handwriting she had perfected over 4 months. The 6 chiefs signed their names. A messenger took the letter to Ashkar. The reply came a week later. Ashkar returned the horse, without explanation. He simply sent it back with one of his warriors. He didn't join. He didn't accept the invitation, but he returned the horse. Daniel understood. Ashkar wasn't a fool. He was testing the boundaries. He found that the border was tougher than he expected. He backed off. For now. At the same time, something happened that Daniel hadn't planned on. A stranger had wandered into Ironwolf's camp. Not an orc, a human. A boy. Skinny, fair-haired, in ragged clothes. He called himself a scribe. Daniel looked at him and saw the neat handwriting on the parchment the boy carried in his bag. Too neat, too literate. Hands without calluses, clean nails. This is no scribe. Or not just a scribe. 2 days later, Daniel realized, not a boy, a girl. Sarah Lindgren, 24 years old. The daughter of a merchant from the free city of Westmark. She had fled a forced marriage to an elderly guild banker. She had joined an orc caravan in the hope of getting far away from the human lands where they were looking for her. Daniel didn't question her in front of everyone. That evening, he sat down next to her by the fire. He said quietly that he knew. Sarah turned pale. Then she sat up straight. She asked what he was going to do. Daniel said he was going to offer her a job. He doesn't have a negotiator for human territories. He knows the orc language, but not human merchant customs. She knows. She grew up in a trading city. She knows all the tricks, all the schemes, all the petty, dirty tricks the guilds use to squeeze a coin out of their partners. He needs someone who can spot those tricks a mile away. Sarah looked at him for a long time. Then she asked why he trusted her. Daniel said he didn't trust her. But that trust is built on working together, not on promises. Sarah thought about it all night. In the morning, she came and said she agreed. Daniel put her to work with Zane, to teach her the common language of human trade contracts. Zane taught Sarah Orcish. Sarah taught Zane human trade jargon. Within a month, they could translate a contract from Orcish to human and back in an hour. Daniel watched the two of them bent over the parchment by lamplight and thought that this was exactly what the beginning of a diplomatic corps looked like. 2 women, one a half-blood shaman, the other a runaway merchant, both cast out by their worlds, both having found a place here. By the end of summer, Daniel had 6 clans in agreement, 1 functioning trade route, 3 key people. Zane for accounting and cartography, Galu for military logistics, Sarah for external negotiations, Garok for everything else, and 1 big problem named Ashkar Blacksun, who sooner or later will decide that patrolling the borders isn't enough. Over the summer, Daniel united the 6 clans in a trade agreement with a common insurance fund. A regular caravan route to the half-elves was established. Chief Ashkar of the Black Sun clan tested the borders by stealing a horse, but backed down after a joint letter from the 6 chiefs. Sarah Lindgren, a runaway from the human lands, whom Daniel uncovered and hired as a negotiator to work with the human guilds. Autumn brought 2 things, a caravan from the human lands and the first mercenary assassin. The caravan came from the west, 10 wagons, a guard of 12 mercenaries, a merchant named Faratus, fat, cunning, with rings on every finger. He had come because a rumor about Orcs trading had reached the Middle Road Guild. The rumor was strange, and the guild had sent someone to investigate. Faratus brought iron, nails, knives, cloth, salt, all at prices 3 times higher than market value. Daniel knew this because Sarah knew it. She looked at the goods, looked at Daniel, shaked her head almost imperceptibly. 3 times. Daniel didn't accuse Faratus of greed. He simply named his price, the market price. Faratus laughed, said the little one didn't understand, that there was no other iron in the steppe, that the orcs could pay his price or do without iron. Daniel nodded, said the orcs would do without, and that he of 4 gnome merchants on the Podgorn road who would sell it cheaper. He didn't know a single gnome merchant, but Faratus couldn't have known that, and Sarah confirmed it without batting an eye. She said that the Hammerfeld house had already sent an inquiry. She made up that name on the spot, but she pronounced it as if she'd known it for 20 years. Faratus haggled for 4 hours. Sarah led the negotiations. Daniel sat beside her and said nothing. He listened. He learned. Sarah was good. No. Sarah was magnificent. She knew every trick, every pause, every gesture, when to raise an eyebrow, when to put down the pen, when to stand up from the table, when to return. Faratus gave ground, point by point. By evening, the price was market rate with a small markup for delivery. Fair enough. The contract was signed. Ferratus left with wagons full of wool and bones and the look of a man who didn't understand how it had happened. Daniel waited until the caravan had disappeared over the horizon. Then he turned to Sarah. He told her she'd done it better than he could have. Sarah stood there, looking him in the eyes. Her chin trembled, barely noticeably. She nodded, quickly, turned away, left. Zane later told Daniel that Sarah had cried that night in her tent, quietly. Daniel didn't ask why. He knew why. All her life, she'd been valued by how much a dowry would fetch for her in marriage. For the first time, she was valued for what she could do. A mercenary arrived a week after the caravan. Quiet, of average height, a man. He called himself a wandering master knife maker. He came to offer his services. A good knife, steel, a sharp edge. Daniel would have let him pass if not for Gala. Gala stood 10 paces away as the knife maker laid out his wares. Then she approached Daniel and quietly said one thing. His knives were of gnome-forged steel, mountain steel. A wandering craftsman doesn't make those. The old mountain cartel makes those, and sells them only to their own. Daniel looked at the knife maker with new eyes. His hands, not the hands of a knife maker, too well groomed, soft palms. But on his right hand, between his thumb and index finger, a callus, not from a hammer, from the handle of a throwing knife. He asked Gala what to do. Gala said she could snap his neck in 3 seconds. Daniel said no. He said a dead spy is just a dead spy. A living spy is a source of information. If they let him go, he'll return to his masters and tell them what he saw. Let him tell them. Let the cartel know what the Orcs are trading, that they have warehouses and records and contracts. Let them know that cheap tricks don't work. Gala asked what if he hadn't come to spy but to kill. Daniel thought about it. Then he said that in that case, let Gala break his neck, but in 3 days, not now. Let him see more first. Gala snorted, but she assigned 2 warriors to watch the knife maker, not openly. Just 2 orcs who always happened to be nearby. The knife maker spent 3 days in the camp. He watched. He asked questions. He traded knives. On the morning of the 4th day, he was gone. He left at night, quietly. Gala checked. He hadn't stolen anything. He hadn't broken anything. He hadn't killed anyone. A spy, not a killer, this time. Daniel exhaled. Then he stopped exhaling because 2 days later, Borga Khan Ugdar arrived, the chieftain of the North Wind clan, the only female chieftain among the 12 clans. She arrived with 15 riders, without warning, without an invitation. She simply appeared on the horizon and rode up to the camp as if it were her own home. Daniel was seeing her for the first time. Tall, even for an orc woman. Broad-shouldered, a stern face, eyes like 2 pieces of obsidian. Not a single superfluous movement, not a single unnecessary word. She dismounted, walked past Garrock as if he were a pillar, walked past Tarbar, stopped in front of Daniel, looked down at him. He looked up at her. She said 3 words, "Show me everything." She didn't ask. She didn't ask. She ordered. Daniel showed her. The storage rooms, the smokehouses, the workshop, Zane's records, the route map, the contracts with the half-goblins, the contract with Ferratus, the family registry, the blacksmith schedule, the livestock pen, the drainage ditches, the markings on the sacks, everything. Borga walked beside him in silence. She listened. She didn't ask any questions. She just took it all in. 2 hours. Then she stopped, turned to him, said she had 300 orcs, that 8 had died last winter of starvation, 4 of them children. She said this in an even voice, without emotion, like a report. Then she asked how much it would cost to join the agreement. Daniel answered as always, 10% to the common fund, 20 young orcs for training. Borga nodded. Then she added one condition. She didn't want to be just a participant. She wanted a seat on the council. If the 6 chieftains made decisions together, she wanted a vote, and not the last one. Daniel looked at her and saw what he saw in every strong leader he had ever met. A person who doesn't ask for a seat. A person who comes and takes a seat. He said she would get a seat on the council, that, moreover, he wanted her to handle internal affairs, disputes between clans, quota distribution, conflict resolution, because she knows orcs better than he ever will. Borga looked at him for a long time, a very long time. Then, for the first time during the entire visit, her expression changed. Not a smile, not laughter. Something in her eyes. Recognition. One professional acknowledging another. She said she agreed. 7 clans. A week after Borga's visit, news arrived from Redstone. The Black Sun clan had attacked their pastures, stolen 100 sheep, killed 2 shepherds. Ashkar was no longer patrolling the borders. Ashkar declared war. The first human caravan arrived in the steppe, and Sarah conducted brilliant negotiations, driving the prices down to 1/3. The Gnome cartel sent a spy disguised as a knife maker, and Gala exposed him. Borga Khan Ugdar, leader of the North Wind, entered into an agreement and was appointed head of internal affairs. Ashkar of the Black Sun clan attacked Redstone, stealing sheep and killing shepherds, which signaled open conflict. Garok wanted blood. Everyone wanted blood. The council of 7 chiefs gathered in Tarbar's tent, and the air buzzed with fury. The 2 dead shepherds from Redstone had not simply been killed. Ashkar had cut off their right hands and hung them on posts at the border of the pastures. It was a sign of war, a challenge, as ancient as the steppe itself. The grunting chieftain of Broken Fang pounded his fist on the ground and demanded a retaliatory raid. 2 others nodded. Young warriors behind the tent's curtain sharpened their axes and waited. Daniel sat in the corner and said nothing. He could not speak now. Not because he had nothing to say, because any word from a stranger calling for peace at this moment would sound like cowardice, and cowardice would destroy everything he had built faster than Ashkar's army. He waited, watched, listened, waited for the moment. Borga was the first among those who weren't shouting to speak. She stood up, steadily, quietly, and she said that if the 7 clans marched on the Black Sun, Ashkar would get what he wanted. War. And war means time. Time when no one transports grain, doesn't build granaries, doesn't trade. Time when the strongest wins and the rest submit. Ashkar is the strongest after the Iron Wolf. 600 warriors. If the war drags on for even 2 months, the caravans will stop. The half-elves will close the border. The human merchants will leave. Everything built over the past year will crumble. The tent fell silent. Borga continued. She said that Ashkar is no fool, that he struck Redstone on purpose. Redstone is the weakest in the agreement. If the agreement does not protect the weakest, then it is worthless. And every chieftain at this table knows it. She is right. Daniel saw it. It was a test. Not of Redstone, of the agreement. If the 7 clans respond individually, Ashkar will crush them one by one. If they respond together, it will be an army Ashkar cannot handle. But responding together is one thing. Responding together correctly is another. Daniel stood up. The moment had come. Everyone turned to look at him. He spoke softly, but in the silence of the tent, a soft voice is heard better than a shout. He said that they must fight Ashkar. But not the way Ashkar expects, not with a raid, not with a skirmish, not blood for blood. Ashkar expects the 7 clans to send warriors who will hunt him down in the steppe, and the steppe is vast, and Ashkar knows it better. He will evade them, attack supply trains, drag out the war, wear them down. Instead, Daniel proposed something else. To cut off Ashkar's trade. The Black Sun clan stands in the north of the steppe. To the north of it lie the mountains. To the west, the lands of the people. To the south and east, the 6 clans of the agreement. If the 6 clans simultaneously close their routes to Ashkar, not a single caravan will pass through their lands to the Black Sun. Not a single sheep will be sold at the market through their middlemen. Not a single sack of grain will reach his camp except what he grows himself. And he won't grow enough, because his lands are poor, mountain steppe, short summer. Without trade through the southern clans, the Black Sun will begin to starve in 3 months. Without war, without bloodshed, without lost warriors. Shator was silent. Grokon slowly withdrew his fist from the ground. He looked at Daniel. He looked at Borga. He looked at Garok. Garok stood with a stony face, but his eyes were shining. He understood. Borga nodded. Once. Tarbar spoke a single word from his corner. Do it. Daniel did it. 3 days for planning. Zane drew a map of the routes. Every trail along which a caravan could be led to the Black Sun was marked. There turned out to be 11. Each one needed a patrol. Not an army. 2 or 3 horsemen. The task was not to fight. The task was to report. If the caravan was heading for Ashkar, the 6 clans would find out within a day and send their negotiators to the caravan. Not warriors, negotiators, who will explain to the merchant that trading with the Black Sun means not trading with the rest of the steppe. That the 6 clans mean more customers, more goods, more profit. Why lose 6 for the sake of 1? Sarah wrote a template for such a conversation. 3 versions, for stubborn merchants, for cautious ones, for the greedy. Each version hit the right spot. They showed the greedy the numbers, they showed the cautious the risks, they showed the stubborn the alternative. Gala took charge of coordinating the patrols. 11 routes, 33 riders, a shift schedule, patrol routes, communication points. She sat over the map of Zane and placed the markers. Stones of different colors. Green for her own, red for the enemy, black for the Ashkar. Daniel watched and thought she was a natural military logistician. All she needed was a map and a mission. The blockade went into effect a week later. The first caravan turned back after 2 days of negotiations. The second didn't make it to the border. The third was from the gnomes. The gnome caravan proved stubborn. It charged straight ahead. Guards with crossbows. Gala sent 30 horsemen, not for battle, for a show of force. 30 orcs on horseback stood on the hill and silently looked down. The gnome caravan stopped, hesitated, turned around, left. A month later, Ashkar sensed it. His caravans weren't moving. His grain wasn't arriving. His wool wasn't selling. 600 orcs began to grumble. They weren't starving yet, but they were grumbling. Because the young warriors were used to raiding redstone, which yielded plunder. And now there was no plunder, and no raids, and no trade. There was nothing. Ashkar sent a messenger, not to Tarbar, not to Garok, to Daniel. The messenger delivered Ashkar's words. The leader of the Black Sun wanted to speak, in person, with the little one who counts. Garok said no. Daniel said yes. Garok said it was a trap. Daniel said it might be, but that Ashkar was weaker now than he had been a month ago, and that a weak enemy who wants to talk is better than a strong enemy who remains silent. They met on neutral ground. Transit point number 1, Daniel, Garok, Borga. On the other side, Ashkar and 2 of his warriors. Ashkar turned out to be different from what Daniel had imagined. Not huge, average height for an orc. Lean, quick, an intelligent face, quick eyes. He moved like a man who calculates every step. Daniel recognized the type. An ambitious middle manager who believes he deserves more and is willing to do anything to prove it. Ashkar sat down across from him. He looked at Daniel. Then he said that the little guy had surprised him. He said he'd expected warriors, but got a weakling instead. He said it was cowardice. Daniel didn't respond to the provocation. He asked what Ashkar wanted. Ashkar said it straight out. He wants to be in charge. He wants the Black Sun to be first in the agreement. He wants his clan to receive more than the others, because he is greater than the others. Daniel replied that greater does not mean first, that there are no firsts or lasts in the agreement. There is a common fund and equal shares. Ashkar said that was a weakness, that the strong should get more. Daniel said that the strong who take more will be left alone when they become weak, and everyone becomes weak sooner or later. One drought, one plague, one war. Ashkar was silent. Borga added, "She said that last winter 8 of her orcs had died, 4 children, because she was alone, because no one helped, because everyone looked out for themselves. She said it wouldn't be like that anymore." Ashkar looked at Borga, then at Daniel, then at Garok. Then he stated his terms. He'd agree to the deal, 10% to the fund, but his warriors wouldn't build storage facilities. His warriors would guard the caravans, because his warriors are the best in the steppe, and that is their strength. Daniel thought for 10 seconds. Then he nodded. Guarding caravans was exactly what he needed. Specialization. One clan builds, another transports, a third guards. Everyone does what they do best. Like on an assembly line. Like a supply chain. 8 clans. Ashkar attacked Redstone, but instead of a military response, Daniel proposed a trade blockade. 6 clans blocked all routes to the Black Sun, and a month later, Ashkar was forced to come to the negotiating table. He agreed to the terms on the condition that his warriors would guard the caravans rather than build storage facilities. Thus was born the clan specialization system. Borga and Sarah played key roles in the negotiation process. 1 year, 365 notches on the post. Daniel stood before the pillar and counted. A year ago, he had woken up in the grass next to dead elves. A year ago, he didn't know if he would live to see the evening. Now he stood in a camp that was no longer a camp. It was a city. Small, dirty, crooked, but a city. 3 storage facilities, 5 smokehouses, a blacksmith's workshop with 2 blacksmiths, Ergot and Ragtun. A spinning workshop where the orc women learned to process wool to marketable quality. Cattle pens with shelters. An infirmary. For now, just a larger tent with clean hides and a supply of herbs. But with a logbook. Daniel insisted on the logbook. Every orc who comes in with an injury or illness is recorded. Name, symptoms, treatment, outcome. Zane kept the log until Kim Hyunju arrived. Hyunju showed up in early autumn, a refugee, a human girl from the distant kingdom of Hwasong on the east coast. Small, quiet, with a basket of herbs and the eyes of someone who had watched their home burn. Valdemarian marauders had passed through her village on their way to the steppe. The village burned down. Her father, an apothecary, died. She walked east for 3 months, through forests, through fields, through lands from which any sane person would have fled westward. She was heading toward the Orcs, because she had heard that the Orcs now accept strangers, that the Orcs have a strange little man who builds strange things. She came with herbs and knowledge and a willingness to work. Daniel spoke with her once. 10 minutes. That was enough. She knew herbs better than any Orcish healer. She knew how to stop bleeding, how to bring down a fever, how to treat inflammation. She knew which steppe plants could be used instead of those that grew on the coast. She had already adapted her recipes. Over 3 months of travel, alone, without books, from memory. Daniel told her one thing. He asked if she knew why you had to wash your hands before treating a wound. Hyunju looked at him strangely. She said of course she knew, that dirt in a wound meant death, that her father had taught her this since childhood, and that every healer she'd told this to had laughed in her face. Daniel didn't laugh. He said she was now the head of the infirmary. Hyunju blinked. She asked him to repeat it. He repeated it. Head. The infirmary would grow. It would go from a tent to a building, with wards, with the sick separated from the wounded, with hand-washing before every procedure, with a logbook. And she would oversee all of it. Hyunju stood there, clutching her basket with both hands. Her knuckles turned white from the grip. Then she quietly asked if the male healers listened to her. Daniel said they would, because he would sign a decree, a document, with a seal, making her diagnosis at the infirmary final. No one could dispute it. Hyunju looked at him for a long time. Then she nodded, once, quickly, and she went to the infirmary with a basket. Zane later said that Hyunju sat in the infirmary for an hour with the decree in her hands and couldn't believe the paper was real. The 8 clans worked as a single organism, not perfectly, with interruptions, with conflicts, with arguments at every council meeting, but they worked. Caravans traveled to the half-elves every 20 days, to human merchants every month. 3 transit points were operational. A common fund was collected and distributed. Zane handled the general accounting. Sarah negotiated with the outside world. Gala coordinated route security. Borga settled disputes between the clans. Garak was the face. His word meant more to the chieftains than Daniel's because Garak was an orc. He was a warrior. He was the chieftain's son. Daniel stood behind him, always, as a matter of principle. Every decision looked like Garak's decision. Every victory was Garak's victory. Every new route, every new contract, every new clan brought into the agreement. That was Garak, not Daniel. Daniel just did the math. Once, Sarah asked him, "Didn't it bother him?" Daniel said no. He said that in Seattle, he'd worked at Amazon for 8 years, and that the best supply chain managers are the ones the customer never hears about. If everything works, it means the manager did his job. If the manager is in the spotlight, it means something broke. He doesn't want to be in the spotlight. He wants things to work. Sarah looked at him and said nothing. Then she said he was a strange man. Daniel agreed. Then the remaining 4 clans arrived. Not all at once, one by one, over the course of 3 months. Fall. Winter was near. The second winter. And every chieftain who remembered the previous winter knew one thing. Those in the agreement eat. Those not in the agreement take a risk. The math is simple. The Stone Eye clan arrived last. The old shaman of that clan, Drokhan, was Daniel's fiercest opponent on the steppe, even more fierce than Ruk Tahar. Drokhan spoke at every council, saying that the stranger was destroying the orc way, that the ancestors did not count sacks, that an orc's strength lay in his hand, not in his paper. He said this for a year, while his clan starved, while others ate, while his young warriors left for the neighbors because the neighbors had storehouses. Drokhan came to Daniel alone, without an entourage, without a chieftain. The chieftain of the Stone Eye clan was young and had long wanted to enter into an agreement but could not go against his shaman. Drokhan came, and Daniel met him at the storehouse. The old orc stood and looked at the stone walls, at the dry sacks, at the markings, at the numbers. Then he turned to Daniel. His face was that of a man who acknowledges defeat, but does not give up. He removed his shaman's staff, long, heavy, decorated with bones and beads, a symbol of his power and knowledge. He placed it before Daniel and said he had been wrong, said that if Daniel wanted to, he could break the staff. If he didn't want to, he should give it back. Daniel looked at the staff, at the old hands that had placed it there, at the shaman's eyes in which there was no malice. There was weariness, and something else, hope, perhaps. He picked up the staff, heavy, bone and wood and years. He held it, then gave it back, said he didn't need the staff. He said Drokhan needed the staff, so he'd have something to lean on when he got tired. Drokhan took the staff in both hands. He stood in silence. Then he turned and walked away. The next day, the stone-eyed chieftain sent a messenger with a request to enter into an agreement. Drokhan had no objection. 12 clans, all of them. For the first time in the history of the Kar Ugdan steppe, all 12 orc clans were united. Not by force, not by fear, not by magic, by paper, by numbers, by warehouses, by caravans, by contracts, by profit. Daniel stood on a hill above the camp. Standing beside him were Zaini and Gala and Sarah and Hyunju and Borga. They looked down, at the city that was growing, at the carts that were passing, at the orcs working, at the smoke from the smokehouses, at the caravan heading south, at the Ashkar horsemen patrolling the route, at Ragtun hammering away in the smithy, at Zaina's apprentice from the Bitterroot clan who was carrying a recording tablet through the camp, at the children who would not die this winter because the grain would not rot. Garak approached from behind. He stood beside her, silently. Then he said that the Council of 12 wanted to give Daniel a title. Khan Sahir, the Counting Khan. No such title existed. They made it up for Daniel, because no existing title described what he did. Daniel said he would accept it, on one condition: he does not sit above Garak in council. He would not wear the insignia of a chieftain. He would not command warriors. He would deliberate, he would plan, he would build. And the face of authority would be Garak, always Garak. Garak looked at him for a long time. Then he said that Daniel was the most stubborn non-orc he had ever met. Daniel replied that in Seattle they called him the same thing, only in English. 12 clans. Khan Sahir. Year 1 complete. Everything else lay ahead. A year had passed since Daniel's arrival on the steppe. All 12 clans had joined the agreement. Kim Hyun-ju, a refugee herbalist, became the head of the first infirmary with an official decree confirming the indisputability of her diagnosis. The old shaman Dro Khan of the Stone Eye clan acknowledged Daniel's rightness in a symbolic scene with a staff. Daniel received the title of Khan Sahir and insisted that Garak remain the face of authority. All key figures are in place, and the system is working. The first human caravan came to the steppe not for trade, for reconnaissance. Daniel realized this when Sarah brought him a copy of the letter. She had intercepted it from one of the cart drivers. He was carrying the message sewn into the lining of his saddle. The letter was addressed to Lord Marshal Haldor Westenfeld, commander of Valdemar's punitive expedition. The letter contained a description of the encampment, the number of tents, the number of warriors, the location of the storerooms, and one sentence that made Daniel sit down. A man of non-orcish appearance has been spotted among the orcs, overseeing the logistics, presumably a captive or a defector. It is recommended to verify. They knew about him. Not exactly, not in detail, but they knew. Sarah stood nearby while he read. Then she said quietly that Valdemar had been gathering an army for a year, that she'd heard about it back in Westmark, that a punitive expedition wasn't a raid, it was a war of annihilation. 40,000 soldiers, heavy infantry, cavalry, siege engineers. The goal wasn't to punish the orcs. The goal was to occupy the steppe, to plow it up, to settle it, to slaughter the orcs or drive them into the mountains. Daniel placed the letter on the table. He looked at the map of Zain, which now covered an entire wall of the tent. The steppe. 12 clans, routes, transit points, trade routes, and on the western edge of the map, a thick red line, the border of Valdemar. Beyond that line were 40,000 men who were coming here to kill. He gathered everyone: Garak, Borgu, Galu, Zain, Sarah, Hyunju. He summoned Ashkar as well, and old Tarbar, who could barely stand anymore but listened with unwavering clarity. Daniel spoke for an hour, without a break. It was the first time in a whole year he had spoken for so long. He explained that war was inevitable, that Valdemar would arrive by spring, that 40,000 was more than all the steppe orcs combined, that in open battle the orcs would lose, not because they were weaker, because the Valdemar army was a machine, a supply train, engineers, discipline, a chain of command. You can't throw individual warriors against a machine. You need another machine to fight a machine. Ashkar listened with burning eyes. He asked, "What kind of machine?" Daniel answered, "Logistics. It is not the sword that defeats an army. Food defeats an army. Arrows defeat an army. Horseshoes defeat an army. Bandages defeat an army. An army that eats every day is stronger than an army that eats every other day. An army with spare bowstrings is stronger than an army that has run out of bowstrings. War is mathematics." And Daniel knew better than any Lord Marshal. The plan was simple in theory and monstrously complex to execute. First, avoid a general battle. Orcs are faster. The steppe is their home. The Valdemarians are slow, tied to the supply train. If the orcs don't stand as a wall but keep moving, the Valdemarians will be chasing a shadow. Second, Strike at the supply trains, not at the army, at its stomach. Every supply train burned is 1,000 hungry soldiers. Every cartload of horseshoes intercepted means 100 horses that won't be able to ride in a week. Third, stretch their lines of communication. Lure them deep into the steppe. The farther the army is from Valdemar, the longer the supply line, the more vulnerable the supply trains, the more expensive every day of war. Fourth, trade in parallel. Do not stop the caravans. Show the world that the Orcs are fighting and trading at the same time, that the war has not broken the system, that contracts are being fulfilled, that the half-elves are getting their wool, that human merchants are getting their goods. Let Valdemar wage war against the Orcs, who, at the same time, feed half the continent. We'll see how long Valdemar's allies will support a war that destroys their trade. Garrock listened and said nothing. When Daniel finished, he stood up. He walked over to the map. He stared at it for a long time. Then he turned and said one sentence. "I need an army that eats every day." Daniel nodded. That was the task. For the next 3 months, Daniel didn't sleep, or he slept so little that the difference was imperceptible. Hyunju brought him potions that made his head work but his hands shake. He drank and worked. The map became overlaid with layers. The first layer, routes. The second layer, warehouses. The third layer, supplies. The fourth layer, time. Each warehouse contained a specific amount of grain, meat, arrows, leather, and bandages. Each warehouse stood at a specific distance from a potential line of battle. Each warehouse could supply a certain number of warriors for a certain number of days. If the battle shifted east, Warehouse 4 would open. If south, Warehouse 7. If the enemy broke through to Warehouse 12, evacuating the supplies would take 6 hours. He calculated this on wax tablets, dozens of tablets. Zane helped. Sarah helped. Borga checked every calculation for feasibility. Would there be enough orcs, enough carts, enough horses, enough time? Gala translated everything into military terms. Where to post sentries, where to set ambushes, where to retreat, where to hold the line. Ashkar trained the raiding parties, swift detachments of 20 horsemen. One task: find the supply train. Burn the supply train. Get away before the guards arrive. Don't play the hero. Don't fight. Burn it and leave. Ashkar grinned as he listened. This was the kind of war he liked. Not a mindless head-on clash. A hunt. Cunning. Fast. Vicious. 3 months later, Daniel had a network of 14 field depots, scattered across the steppe according to a scheme he privately called a distributed network. No single depot was critical. The loss of any 2 wouldn't break the system. Losing any 4 would slow things down but not stop them. To break the supply line, one would have to find and destroy 8 out of 14. And finding them in a steppe the Valdemarians didn't know was a task that would take months. Garrock looked at the finished plan, at the map with 14 points, at the inventory lists, at the supply schedules, at the raid group's routes. Then he looked at Daniel, and for the first time in a whole year, he spoke without a snort or a smirk. "You gave us a chance." Daniel shook his head. He said they'd always had a chance. He'd just calculated it. An enemy letter was intercepted, and it became clear that Valdemar knew about the changes in the steppe and was preparing an army of 40,000 soldiers. Daniel developed a war strategy based on logistical superiority. Not a general battle, but strikes against supply trains and stretching the enemy's lines of communication. A network of 14 distributed field depots has been established. The Ashkar are training raiding parties to destroy enemy supply trains. All 12 clans are preparing for war without ceasing trade. Valdemar arrived in early spring. Not 40,000, 35. 5,000 remained at the border as a reserve. But 35,000 heavy infantry and cavalry form a wall of steel, moving across the steppe at a speed of 20 kilometers a day. Gala's scouts spotted them 3 days before they entered the steppe. Mounted messengers brought the news to every warehouse, every clan, every staging area. The communication system Daniel had built over 6 months worked flawlessly. 6 hours after the first report, all 12 chieftains knew that the war had begun. Lord Marshal Haldor Westenfeld led the army in 2 columns. The main force marched through the center of the steppe. The second flank column was moving around from the south, a classic pincer maneuver. Pinch the orcs between the 2 groups and crush them. Daniel looked at the map and saw what Haldor could not see, the supply line. The main column was pulling a supply train of 400 wagons. 400 wagons for 35,000 men. He did the math. 3 weeks' worth of supplies without resupply. In 3 weeks, Haldor would need a new supply train from Valdemar. The supply line was stretching longer with each passing day. For the first week, Daniel ordered them not to be touched. Let them go. Let them go deeper. Let them get used to the silence. Let them think the orcs have fled. Haldor pressed forward. His scouts found empty encampments, cold campfires, abandoned tents. The orcs were gone, or so it seemed. On the 8th day, Ashkar struck. The first raiding party, 20 horsemen, night. The rear supply train of the southern column, 40 wagons, a guard of 60 soldiers. The orcs came silently. They set fire to the outer wagons. When the guards rushed to put out the fire, they set the middle ones ablaze. When the guards spread out between the 2 fires, they struck from a third direction. Not at the men, at the horses. They cut the reins, the horses scattered. The guards were left without transport. The orcs vanished into the darkness. Valdemarite losses. 12 wagons were completely burned. 18 were damaged. Orc losses? 0. 0. Haldor received the report in the morning. Daniel learned of it via a messenger from Gala by evening. On the 10th day, the second raiding group struck the water convoy of the main column. Barrels of water for the horses. 5 barrels were pierced by arrows and emptied before the guards woke up. On the 12th day, the third group led 40 horses away from the night herd of cavalry. They didn't kill a single soldier. They just led the horses away, quietly, through the half-dug trench with which the Valdemarians had surrounded the camp. The trench was half-dug because the southern column had lost some of their tools during the first raid. Daniel hadn't planned it. It just happened. One loss led to another, a chain reaction. Like in a warehouse when the loss of one shipment delays 10 others. Haldor stopped. On the 14th day, Valdemar's army hadn't moved an inch. Haldor was waiting for the supply train to arrive. The train was coming from Valdemar, 400 kilometers, along a road that ran through the steppe where the orcs were at home. The 4th raiding party intercepted the supply convoy halfway there. They didn't burn it, they captured it. 200 carts loaded with grain, flour, salt, and horseshoes. The guards surrendered after seeing they were surrounded by 50 mounted orcs. Ashkar wanted to kill the prisoners. Daniel said no. He said to let them go, without weapons, without horses, on foot, westward. Let them go home. Let them tell the story. Ashkar didn't understand. Daniel explained. A dead soldier is a line in a report. A living soldier who walks home unarmed across 100 kilometers of steppe is a story. Stories are scarier than reports. Stories spread. Stories undermine morale. Every soldier in the Valdemar army will hear that the supply train was captured and the guards were let go barefoot. And they'll think, what if tomorrow it's me? Ashkar thought. Then he nodded slowly and said that the little one fought dirtier than any orc he'd ever known. It was a compliment. 3 weeks. Valdemar's army stood still. It didn't move. Haldor waited for the new supply train. The new supply train was coming with reinforced guards, 1,000 soldiers. Daniel didn't touch it. Let it come. 1,000 soldiers from the main army had been assigned to guard the supply train. 1,000 fewer on the front lines. The supply train arrived. The army moved again, but more slowly, more cautiously. Reconnaissance ahead, patrols on the flanks. Haldor was learning. Daniel was learning too. After a month of war, Valdemar's army had advanced 200 kilometers into the steppe. It had lost 400 wagons, 3,000 horses, and not once had it seen the orc army. Because there was no orc army in the usual sense. There were raiding parties, there were patrols, there were shadows in the night that came, burned, and left. And the orc families were safe, evacuated to the east, toward the mountains, where warehouses 9, 10, 11, and 12 stood, where there was grain and meat and water, where orc children ate every day because Daniel had calculated the supplies 6 months before the war. Haldor Westenfeld was a smart man. A month later, he realized, he couldn't catch the orc army. He couldn't find the orc encampments because there were no encampments. He couldn't supply his army because every supply train was a target. He couldn't retreat because that would be a disgrace. And he couldn't move forward because ahead lay only the steppe, endless, empty, hungry. He sent a messenger to Garak. Haldor wanted to meet. The war with Valdemar had begun. An army of 35,000 entered the steppe. Ashkar's raiding parties destroyed supply trains, intercepted provisions, and drove off horses without engaging in open combat. In a month, the Valdemarians lost 400 wagons and 3,000 horses without ever seeing the orc army. The orc families were evacuated to the eastern warehouses. Haldor Westenfeld requested negotiations. The meeting took place on a hill between the two camps. Neutral ground, no weapons. Garak and Daniel on one side, Haldor Westenfeld on the other, alone, without an entourage. This spoke volumes about him more than any report. A man who comes alone is either a madman or certain that his word carries more weight than an army. Haldor turned out to be exactly as Daniel had imagined him from the intercepted reports. Tall, lean, a gray streak at his left temple, eyes gray and cold as a winter sky. His uniform was impeccable. His boots were polished even after a month on the steppe, a professional to the core. He looked at Garak, then at Daniel. His gaze lingered on Daniel, and he said he had long wanted to meet the man who had taught the man to count. Daniel said nothing. Neither did Garak. Haldor sat down on a rock. He placed his hands on his knees, and he spoke. He spoke like a man who had done the math and seen the result. He said his army could stand in the steppe for another 3 months. It could burn everything it found. It could kill thousands of orcs. But it couldn't win. It couldn't hold the steppe. It couldn't plow the land that was set ablaze every night. It couldn't build a village that was razed every week. The war would cost Valdemar more than the entire steppe was worth. He had calculated it. Daniel listened and learned. Haldor was his equal, not an ideologue, not a fanatic, a strategist. A man who thinks in numbers, who had come to fight because he was ordered to, and who now saw that the order was impossible to carry out. Not because the orcs were stronger, because it was too costly. Garak spoke up. He said that the orcs didn't want war. They hadn't wanted it and hadn't started it. He said that Valdemar had come to kill, and that the orcs were defending their home. Haldor didn't argue. He nodded. He said he understood. And he asked on what terms peace was possible. Daniel spoke up. He had been preparing these terms for 3 months. Every point had been calculated. Every number had been checked by Zane. Every phrase had been reviewed by Sarah. Every military consequence had been assessed by Gala. Every domestic political risk had been weighed by Borgo. First, Valdemar withdraws its army across the border, completely, unconditionally. Second, Valdemar recognizes Kar Ubden as the sovereign territory of the 12 clans. Third, free trade. Orc caravans pass through Valdemar duty-free. Valdemar caravans pass through the steppe with a 5% duty. Fourth, Valdemar pays compensation for the invasion, not in gold, in grain. 10,000 sacks over the course of a year. Fifth, a permanent trade mission in the capital of Valdemar. And the Orcish mission has diplomatic status. Immunity. Haldor listened to each point. His expression didn't change. A professional. When Daniel finished, Haldor was silent for a minute. Then he said that point 4 was impossible, that the Valdemar crown would not pay the orcs. It would be political suicide. Daniel had expected this. He offered an alternative. Not compensation, a trade credit. Valdemar grants orc caravans duty-free passage for 5 years instead of permanently. In 5 years, the terms are renegotiated. The economic effect is the same, but it sounds not like a disgrace, but like a trade agreement. Haldor thought, for a long time. 5 minutes. Then he nodded. He said he would report it to the crown, and that he personally considered the terms reasonable. Then he looked at Daniel and asked quietly who he was. Not his name, not his title, where he was from and why he was here. Daniel answered honestly. He said he was from a distant place where there was no magic. He said he had ended up here against his will. He said he did what he knew how to do, what he believed in. Haldor looked at him. Then he said something strange. He said that the elves were very interested in Daniel, that the elven ambassador in Valdemar had asked twice about the man among the orcs, that the elves know more than they say. They always know more than they say. Daniel remembered that. Haldor stood up. He extended his hand to Garrock.